Welcome to the Mind Design Sports Podcast. I'm Brandon, and in each episode, I'll be talking about sports psychology with the guest speaker. If you want to design your sports experience, you've come to the right place. If you want more tips and insights on how to improve your sports performance mentally, check out our website and other podcasts at mind-designsports.org. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mind Design Sports Podcast. Today, I have on Billie Weiss, an award-winning Boston-based commercial photographer and videographer. He's also the senior manager of photography at the Boston Red Sox. Thanks for joining me, Billie, and I really appreciate it. Do you want to touch on your background anymore and expand upon like photographer, videographer, just to explain what that is, just in case the younger athletes don't really know what that is?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm Billie Weiss. I am originally from Baltimore, Maryland, but live up here in Boston now. I've been in Boston for the past 10 or 11 years, and really kind of got started in photography in high school. Kind of discovered it as a passion and a hobby of mine, and I felt like it kind of came more naturally to me than some of the other things like math and science and all the other stuff in school. And it wasn't really until college that I started to kind of, really get serious about it. I joined the student newspaper, and that kind of got me out shooting every day with a purpose, having assignments to fulfill, stories to work on, and kind of really being out and visible on campus with the camera. And I used that portfolio to then network myself into a few internships during college. One was with the team photographer for the Baltimore Orioles. So that's kind of how the whole baseball realm got started. After I graduated with that internship, I worked for the Orioles for a second season as a part-timer, and then learned about the Red Sox internship and moved up to Boston for a Red Sox photography internship, and was lucky enough to stick around. The rest kind of grew from there, and the rest is history. But 11 years later, here we are.
That's awesome. Cool. Is there something about photography that really like makes you excited to do every day? Is it the final product? Is it the process of it, or just something else about it, or even like a combination?
I think for me, it's a big part of it is the access that it gives you, and it puts you in situations and moments and in front of people that you otherwise wouldn't find yourself in. When you talk about applying it to sports specifically, you've got a front row seat to some of the greatest sporting events and venues in the world, and you're able to witness some of the most exciting and meaningful moments in sport. And as a sports fan and a former athlete, I think it's kind of the perfect combination of creativity and athletics that puts you in this kind of magical world where you're able to kind of see that firsthand. So, for me, the camera is empowering, and it gives you kind of a credential or a key to these places that you never thought you would ever set foot in.
Gotcha. Just curious, if it was like another sport, not baseball, would you enjoy it just as much, or would it be kind of like an adjustment, or you still like it just as much, photography wise?
Definitely. I mean, shooting every sport is different. There are different kind of general rules that apply to each sport when it comes to photography, and it's just a different pacing for each sport. I do a lot of the mainstream sports, so when I'm not doing baseball, I'm doing football, basketball, hockey up here in the Northeast, and those are kind of the more mainstream sports, which are great. I'm super also interested in kind of these non-traditional sporting events that kind of last over one short period of time rather than like an entire season. So something like a tennis tournament, a Grand Slam tennis tournament like Wimbledon, or like the Dakar Rally in overseas, and kind of like the Tour de France, like events that kind of just happen once, and there's a lot of build up to those events are what intrigue me and interest me. And so like if I'm talking bucket list, like those are the type of events that I would love to shoot, in addition to those like day-to-day mainstream sports that we all see.
Yeah. What was your coolest moment you've seen so far while like taking photos or videoing? Like, is there like a specific game or moment that was really historic or like special to you?
Well, I've been through two World Series championships with the Red Sox here, one in 2013 and one in 2018. And they're both, amazing and special for different reasons. In 13, it was kind of, off of the terrible tragedy of the Boston Marathon bombing and how the city, kind of came together and rode the back of the Red Sox all the way through that year, and winning the championship kind of helped the city heal together. So being a part of that and being able to document that story was really special on an emotional level. And then in 2018, we were just a really good team, and the team kind of dominated all the way through the season. And so just witnessing kind of a pure dominance of the sport all the way through to a championship was really cool. And at the Red Sox, I've seen some other great things, retirement in the last few years of David Ortiz, and the 100th anniversary of Fenway Park. And, there's a lot of special moments that happen every year, but those are kind of a few of the key ones.
That's awesome. Being around sports so much and like having that firsthand, I guess like view, have you learned about like baseball or sports in general more as like a sport, or even just like looking at the athletes, watching them play? If so, like what have you learned?
Totally. I mean, when you watch sports or you go to a game as an average everyday fan, you're looking at it through a lens that is kind of disconnected, and you're seeing the
Mhm.
product that comes out on the field. And it's very easy from a passive standpoint to, talk about the athletes or talk about team performance or talk about what's wrong with the league or what you like about the league.
Right.
And it's different. It's very different when you're actually in the mix and your colleagues are the athletes. We're dealing with professional athletes every single day. But the more you work with them, the more you do realize that they are real human beings, with families and other interests outside of the game, and personalities. And so I think that's what you kind of learn from being around sports, is that you see the human side of the athletes. And I think that weaves, really delicately and intricately into the photography in trying to bring that humanity out of them and communicate that to, the
Mhm.
follower, the viewer, the fan. So I think that's what I've kind of learned from, being around so many incredible athletes who are at the top of their game and the top of what they do, is that yes, they are, high profile, highly visible athletes. However, they are human beings just like you and I, and they've got the same emotions and interests and,
Yep.
things that we deal with.
Yeah, you get to see their fuller picture. I get that. So do you get to also like talk one-on-one with them, or like as in a team setting, or is it more of like you're off to the side behind the scenes type thing?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I think it's a balance. I think
Okay.
in order to do what we do really well as a team photographer, your ability to do so is really largely dependent on your ability to make and maintain meaningful relationships with the athletes. And so it all kind of starts on a relationship building level, not taking pictures, but just person to person. What
Yeah.
are you interested in? What are you all about? What do we have in common? And so I think that's kind of how it starts. And then it builds from there. But there are always like individual conversations happening. There are certainly times where myself and the other members of our creative team will address the team as a larger group, just to discuss what we can bring to the table and what we can offer them. And it's just a matter of making them feel like they can trust you, that there's a mutual level of respect
Oh,
going
okay.
both ways, and that you're in a position to help them, rather than put them in any sort of compromising situation. So that's kind of those are the types of conversations that take place on a formal level. But as time goes on, you just kind of develop a healthy friendship and working relationship, and it's just like a normal relationship that you'd have with anybody else.
I see. And like talking to these professional athletes, do you see like a difference or even a similarity between these pro athletes that are older versus like younger athletes in high school or middle school? Is there connections there?
I think it's interesting because uh, off the field and in all the stuff that they have to do, they are a lot more involved. There's a lot more responsibility away from the game. You've got your media
Oh,
responsibilities. You've
right.
got your social media and marketing.
Mhm.
And so I think there are differences there in that they're much more aware of all of that extra responsibility. But then at the same time, once they get out on the field or the court or whatever it is, I think there's a lot of similarities to, kids or young adults at lower levels where they're just having fun playing the game. And it all comes down to that, and all the other auxiliary stuff that is involved with being a professional athlete kind of just goes away, and they're just out there purely enjoying the game in the
Yeah.
moment. And so I think there's definitely differences, and some of those things that you just learn over time. And then I think also there's just at its purest, most simplest level, there's a love of the game that doesn't change whether you're in middle school or high school or in the professionals.
Yeah. And like obviously these professional athletes are becoming adults or already adults for a long time. And with these extra responsibilities, do you think that would affect their mentality or game on the field or on the court? Does it like help it with those extra responsibilities because you're more like diligent with your time and you're more organized? Or do you think it would hurt it because it kind of like distracts you and you have other things to do, so you can't really focus on like baseball as your main priority?
Yeah, I think it can go both ways, and I think it depends at what point the athlete is at when they kind of enter or come into this spotlight. Some
Hmm.
athletes who come into the league, have had the spotlight on them for a long time already, and they're used to this, and they know how to kind of compartmentalize the energy and the stresses of what come with those extra responsibilities and put them aside. And then there's other ones who have never experienced anything like that in their lives, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into this kind of limelight. And I would imagine, I can't speak for them, but I would imagine it can be pretty difficult for some.
Yeah.
You look at baseball specifically, you've got a lot of foreign talent coming in, a lot of young men who have never set foot in the country, who don't speak the language, who suddenly at 18 or 19 or 20 are in the professional levels of baseball, or the developmental leagues very close to becoming professional. So in those cases, I would imagine it's got to be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
The good thing is I think a lot of teams now are really investing in that support and in that development in order to ensure that they're put in a good situation so that they will be successful with those kind of endeavors, which I think is super important.
Awesome response. Jumping back to you in photography, what have you learned as a photographer over your career? And especially being at like the top as a senior manager, like you kind of have that like, I guess, responsibility or even more like, I guess, accessibility. So like, what have you learned over your career?
Well, I think there's a couple things. The first is that, especially in this industry or this world, you have to separate your fandom and your, being
Activity.
starstruck, yeah, in any way,
Yeah.
and separate that and learn how to just act as a professional in this environment. And so I think that's kind of one thing that over the first few years you kind of learn. And then I think the other thing was just, you do have a position that is very meaningful to a lot of people, whether you realize it or not, especially with a brand like the Red Sox, is you are a pipeline to access for so many fans, and that's not to be taken lightly. So your ability to kind of get in there and show the inner workings of a team or an athlete or a coach in a way that is both respectful but enlightening to outside viewers is super, super important. And
Mhm.
I think it's just not to be taken lightly. So that kind of goes into more of like the mentality of photography rather than the technical settings. And the creative aspect is more just like learning the mentality of the job is definitely intricate, and there's a lot of nuance to it.
I see. Um, this will kind of segue to my next question. Do you do any sports on your free time, like as a hobby?
I played tennis in college. I played Division III NCAA tennis, which was great. I grew up playing baseball through the end of high school, so JV and varsity baseball. And then now, yeah, I mean, I still play tennis every once in a while, and I like to run, I like to work out, like to do, Peloton, basic stuff to stay in shape. I'm not in any like organized leagues or anything at the moment,
Okay.
but maybe if there's some time toward the future, I'd love to kind of get back into that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
of
just
course.
basic healthy lifestyle maintenance and upkeep is what I'm into right now.
Yeah. So since like your photography has been so much into sports and you kind of get that like firsthand view, like I said, like all the time, you're kind of constantly exposed to it. Has that helped you on the tennis court or like just with any sports you do in general, like even when you work out? Yeah.
I think maybe a little bit, but I mean, I'm not at a competitive level of anything right now. Like I'm
Right.
not, the most competitive I'll get is like
Mhm.
sign up for a 5K or whatever.
Okay.
So I mean, I use exercise more as a, kind of an escape from work and escape from thinking about, sometimes like the stresses that come with the job. So I don't know if I directly apply, being around athletes to my mentality now. I kind of use it more as like an escape at this point, just to kind of clear my
I see.
mind. And yeah, yeah,
Gotcha. Cool. Um, Also, do you want to talk about like the video side of things, like how video versus photos, when you're like taking pictures or like the split, like are you taking videos half the time and photos half the time? And what's the difference between the two?
yeah, totally. Well, at the Red Sox, we actually have a very, incredibly talented video production staff, and they handle all the video. So myself and my team are strictly photography at the Red
I see.
Sox.
Okay.
That being said, we do collaborate on tons of projects, and it's always cool to kind of have both the photo and video elements going together. I use video more in the freelance side of my business. So when I'm shooting for other sports clients or commercial clients, that's when the video comes in, and it's cool. Like I think in this industry, it's very important to be well versed and well rounded, and have a skill set that isn't just one dimensional. So I took it upon myself to learn the video stuff, and I think it's fun to do, and I think it's a different way of thinking because you're not just looking for that single like isolated instant that's frozen in time. You're
Mhm.
kind of more crafting a story based on different clips and like over an extended period of time. So the video is like definitely something I'm super into. It's more of a, I guess, creative challenge for me. It doesn't come as like naturally to me as photography does. But I love going out there and shooting and kind of dealing with the different elements of video and audio and like putting the edit together in a timeline. So there's a lot more moving parts than just like the still photography.
Yeah, it sounds awesome, like the way you said it, and it's good to have that like uniqueness from like photos, which are like still versus videos, which capture a lot of stuff, a lot of
Exactly.
movements and action. Yeah, cool. Um, doesn't photography and videography like relate to marketing and advertising as well? Like photos being posted on Instagram or social media. I guess that could have a good send a good message to like your audience or fans. Do you want to talk about that and more of like the social side of videos and photos?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because this has evolved like even over the 10 or 11 years that I've been here. Um, when I first started, it was like just take the pictures and they go into an archive and you kind of don't
Mhm.
even see them again. And now, obviously it's all about social and putting the content out in real time and giving fans something to follow along with while they're either watching on TV or at the game on their phones, basically. So we always have to keep that big picture in mind. And while we're shooting, we are constantly transmitting photos and dishing out content to our team in real time. So, we're filing photos in game on our laptops through our cell phones as the action is happening. And, basically that's creating kind of a live experience for fans to follow along with, as the game's happening. And so it's become a huge part of what we do. And it's building the team's brand online, and then it's also building the athlete's kind of individual brand, and
Right.
just kind of communicating to them that the content we're getting, the video, the photos, the graphics, like we will share this stuff with you, and you are free to like put this out for your own brand. And they appreciate that, and it's become a big part of what we do now, which is super interesting.
Yeah. I asked that because a lot of our listeners are like competitive athletes and they also want to get, like, for example, high schoolers want to get recruited to play D1
Mm.
or play overseas or whatever the case may be. And I wanted to ask, if do you think these athletes could use a photographer or videographer to their use and to their, like, advantage? Like, for example, maybe they could help them take photos and then post them on their social medias or even videos. That might make like getting recruited by coaches be more easier. Or is there something else in that type of realm, like, that can help athletes that way?
I think it's definitely an asset. I don't think it's like the number one thing that athletes in that position should rely on. I think
Right.
it's probably more about, their skill and their personality and
Of
their
course.
maturity and being able to network the right way. But I do think it's definitely a valuable asset and becoming more and more part of the equation, just in the space we live in now. I think you can't ignore it. But I would caution people to not like have it overwhelm their personality or
100%.
be like, yeah, the main thing that's driving it. But I've seen, like, you even notice a difference like in the young kids that are coming up now. Like, they have brands, like they have made a brand for themselves already. Whereas, the guys 5, 10, 15 years ago, like, wasn't even on their radar. So it's super interesting to see how that's evolved. And, I think we've all seen, like, the athletes that have a brand for themselves in some form, set themselves up for a very lucrative career.
Yeah.
Whether their success on the field pans out or not, it sets you up for, opportunities either involved with the game or outside of the game that can definitely be valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask that just because I know a lot of people also, like you said, just try to focus on their skills and just trying to be the best they can. And with that mentality, they think that, the fame and, like, the coaches will come to you, like, naturally, instead of, like, using marketing or advertising.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to get your take on that. Cool.
Mhm.
Um, so what are your plans for the next 10 years, 20 years as photographer, as part of the Boston Red Sox? What are your goals?
No, it's a good question. I think within the Red Sox and kind of moving more toward larger scale marketing campaigns. So increasing the production value of what we do and kind of appealing to new audiences and demographics. And it's building on, we're not just a photography team that just takes pictures. It's how does photography fit into that larger package of content that we can deliver, and how can we like curate and craft advertising and marketing campaigns
Mm,
to attract new viewers and new demographics. So that's kind of where we're headed, in the Red Sox. And then I think, individually, like, I think when you have success in a field like this, people kind of like automatically identify you or put you in that box of like baseball photographer, right? Or Red Sox photographer. And that is a huge part of my identity. But, there's also a lot of other stuff that I do. And so I think it's trying to move more into the commercial realm, still working within the sports and lifestyle space, but more, for brands and businesses. So more in an advertising realm rather than kind of that live event sport photography that I've kind of
interesting.
done for the past 10 years, moving kind of more toward the commercial and the campaign side of the industry, and working with athletes, but in that sort of way, rather than, always just being on the sidelines at the games. So that's where I'm headed. Got a lot of ambitions and goals there, and hopefully will pan out.
Gotcha. Yeah. Like, exposing yourself to different, like, fields and, I guess, genres and, like, types of photos you can take. That's awesome. And, like,
Yeah, yeah,
honing your
exactly. And
craft.
just realizing that, um, you know, there's a whole other world out there of like commercial advertising that
Yeah.
still works with athletes, still telling stories of athletes, in a way that I love, in a way that is super creative. But it's a different approach than just being on the sidelines and shooting, day in and day out on the sidelines.
Gotcha. I guess that's, like, one way you try to better yourself. My next question was, like, how do you always try to better yourself as a photographer and videographer? Like, is there a mentality when you, like, are on the field taking photos? Do you want to, like, take it at a different angle, or try to do something unique or new to learn? Or, and I just try to ask this because maybe this tip that you, like, your mentality with photography might resonate with athletes that are listening to this. Maybe they kind of
Mhm.
translate on the court or field, or yeah.
Yeah. No, totally. I think it's an interesting point. Like I am always trying to get better. And I am like a lifelong learner. And I think that's super important within photography or any creative field because, after a certain point, you've got it figured out and like, how to take photos, how
Hmm.
to get good images. You can be dropped into any situation and come out with good results. And I think it's important to not be satisfied once you get to that place. It's like, okay, well, what don't I know? And how can I push myself to learn, that new skill set or that new way of thinking or that new approach to shooting? So I think it's always like goal setting and kind of searching for that next mountain to climb,
Yeah.
which I think is what keeps me going. I mean, you think about a job like mine, like we have 81 home games a year, right? 162 games total if you're including road games. It's the same thing every day, right? So it's like, how are you going to keep yourself creatively fired up? And how are you going to find like new ways to do this? So I think it's just that constant goal setting, and finding new mountains to climb creatively that keeps you going.
Yeah, I think for those athletes out there, I guess that can kind of connect to like pushing out of your comfort zone, always trying to verse a player that's better than you so that you can improve instead of being comfortable playing against someone in their same tier or someone below
Yeah.
you. So definitely
No, and
cool.
you see that like even the best athletes, the athletes that are at the top of their craft, like just thinking through from the Red Sox lens, a David Ortiz, a Dustin Pedroia, a Mookie Betts, these elite, top 10, top 5 in the league athletes are never satisfied. Like every
Oh
day
yeah.
they are working, they are
Hmm.
obsessing over like what can they do better, and if they did one thing wrong, they are like in the gym or in the batting cage the very next day or that night working on it. And just so it's like seeing that, kind of shows you like that's kind of what it takes to be at that level. But even if you're not at that level, like just having that dedication and having that constant desire to grow and to get better, I think is what drives a lot of athletes, and I think that's pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, it's like that hunger and motivation that they have, and that's what makes them so good because, like, you can't really stop them. They have that intrinsic motivation to always better themselves, and I think that's really what separates the good athletes from the
Hmm.
great athletes, the good
Oh,
athletes from the bad ones. So, thanks for that. And
yeah.
if you had one thing to tell these young athletes that listen to the podcast to take away from this podcast, what would it be?
I would just always think back to something my parents always told me when I was playing at every single level, which is just have fun. Like that's the most important thing. Yes, it's important to have success and be motivated and play at a high level if that's your goal. But end of the day, you have to enjoy it while you have it. I miss dearly my days of like high school baseball and college tennis, and life gets a lot more complex when you enter the real world, so to speak, and you start working, and you got family, and like things get more complex, and you kind of miss those simpler days when like you just went out with your friends and had a great time, with whatever sport. So I would just say have fun, and I think that applies to even career in some sense too. Whatever you end up pursuing, for me with photography, like yes, I have goals and I'm motivated and I want to succeed and I want to be better every day and I want to keep learning. But at the end of the day, I'm having a great time doing this every single day. And I love what I do, and I'm passionate about it. And I think, that's super important to find in whatever career you pursue. So I always just try and, during the stressful times, just remember to like enjoy it, have a good
Yeah.
time, and treasure those moments that you get.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, like during those tough times, which will inevitably come up, I think like knowing your purpose and why you're doing it, that's definitely important because it'll kind of push you through and like you won't give up as easily. So yeah, that's great advice. Those are all
Yeah.
my questions. Do you want to like include anything else or talk about anything else?
No, I think it's great what you're doing. I think the mental aspect of sports is definitely something that I think is getting more exposure and attention, but certainly a very important one as much as the physical aspect.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think, in my career and in a similar area of interest in creativity in sports, the mental aspect is almost as challenging as the actual learning the hard technical skills. So I think it's super important work that you're doing and people like you who are in this space are doing. And I encourage people to just stay on top of that and keep that priority at top of mind.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And hopefully these young athletes appreciate your advice and the sports psychology advice. I think it's important as well. And yeah, I appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking about photography and your role in the field. Obviously, it's an important one. It's what we see like most on social media. And I guess people should appreciate the work you guys do because it's not really emphasized as much as like the actual like on the field, the players, athletes that are on the media. So yeah, 100%. I learned a lot. So thanks so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the My Design Sports podcast. Before you leave, please show some love for the podcast by subscribing, liking, and commenting. Stay tuned for next month's podcast with a new guest speaker.